Society has spent generations romanticizing female fragility, mistaking immaturity for innocence and passivity for virtue. From childhood, women are subtly conditioned to believe that their worth is tied to their ability to remain soft, agreeable, and dependent. While men are encouraged to develop resilience, independence, and ambition, women are often rewarded for staying within a carefully crafted illusion of helplessness. This conditioning doesn't just shape behavior, it creates a mental prison that many women never escape. The expectation is simple: be pleasant, be attractive, and wait for the world to accommodate you. But what happens when the world doesn't? This is the hidden trap of female immaturity, a state of psychological adolescence that keeps many women from fully maturing into independent, self-actualized individuals. The illusion that softness and emotional dependence will guarantee protection is not only outdated, it is actively harmful. Women who internalize these beliefs often find themselves stuck in cycles of emotional instability, relationship dissatisfaction, and a deep sense of unfulfilled potential. They feel lost, confused, and increasingly frustrated, yet they don't understand why. The answer is brutally simple. They were never taught to take full ownership of themselves. Carl Jung's psychological framework reveals a deeper truth. Maturity is not about age. It is not about how many years someone has lived or how much experience they have gathered. It is about the integration of the self. A fully mature person is one who has confronted and accepted every part of themselves, their strengths, their flaws, their darkness, and their light. Yet, many women struggle to reach this point because society has conditioned them to reject certain aspects of themselves. They are encouraged to embrace their emotions but avoid responsibility. They are taught to be nurturing but never dominant, agreeable but never truly autonomous. The result? Psychological fragmentation. Many women feel as if they are missing something, but they can't quite define what it is. They have been told that happiness comes from external validation, from being desired, from fulfilling a role rather than building an identity. And so they remain stuck, constantly seeking approval, constantly shifting between dependence and resentment, never fully stepping into their own power. The most dangerous part of this psychological trap is that it feels comfortable. Immaturity is easy. It absolves responsibility. It allows a person to exist in a world of emotional safety, where blame can be placed on external factors and accountability is always someone else's problem. But real life does not reward immaturity. The longer one remains in this state, the harder it becomes to break free. What begins as a conditioned mindset slowly turns into an inescapable identity. The key question is this: what happens when the illusion of safety breaks? Because at some point, it always does. A woman raised to believe that she will always be protected eventually realizes that the world is not built to cater to her expectations. Relationships fail. Social validation fades. The entitlement of youth dissolves into the reality of adulthood. And when this moment comes, she is faced with a brutal choice: adapt or remain trapped. The women who refuse to evolve find themselves spiraling into frustration, bitterness, and self-sabotage. They cling to the belief that the world is unfair to them, rather than acknowledging that they were never truly prepared for it. The problem is not that women are incapable of growth. It is that many have been trained to fear it. Maturity requires discomfort. It demands confrontation with painful truths. It asks for responsibility where immaturity only asks for validation. Many women reject this process not because they don't want to grow, but because they were never taught how. And so, the cycle continues. Women remain in psychological adolescence, mistaking external recognition for internal fulfillment, wondering why, despite everything they were promised, they still feel empty. The truth is, real fulfillment does not come from external validation. It comes from self-ownership. And until this is fully understood, no amount of approval, attention, or validation will ever be enough. The Puella Eterna, the eternal girl, is not a fantasy character. She exists in the real world, living in a state of arrested emotional development, stuck between adolescence and adulthood without ever fully stepping into the latter. She is charming, spontaneous, and deeply attached to the illusion that life should be effortless. She does not see herself as immature. If anything, she views herself as misunderstood, unfairly burdened by a world that demands too much from her. But beneath the surface, she is deeply afraid of responsibility, afraid of structure, afraid of any reality that requires discipline and self-sufficiency rather than fantasy and escapism. The eternal girl does not take ownership of her failures. She externalizes them. If something goes wrong in her life, it is never her fault. She convinces herself that she is a victim of circumstance, that other people are to blame, that the world simply does not understand her. She refuses to see how her own patterns of avoidance and self-sabotage keep her trapped in the same cycles. Instead of evolving, she waits. She waits for the right relationship to fix her insecurities. She waits for the perfect opportunity to magically appear. She waits for someone to step in and take responsibility for her life, so that she doesn't have to. This mindset is not always obvious. The Puella Eterna may seem successful on the surface. She may have a career, a social life, and even a sense of ambition. But if you look deeper, you will find the same underlying patterns of emotional avoidance and dependence. She may change jobs frequently because long-term commitment feels suffocating. She may jump from one relationship to another, always seeking the thrill of new romance but never developing the depth required for lasting love. She may avoid planning for the future, convinced that things will somehow work out without conscious effort. The Puella Eterna is not inherently malicious. She does not set out to harm others or manipulate them. In fact, she often sees herself as the one being wronged, the misunderstood dreamer, the lost soul, the woman who just hasn't found herself yet. But what she fails to realize is that finding oneself is not something that simply happens. It is something that must be actively pursued. The deeper problem with the Puella Eterna mindset is that it makes women vulnerable. A woman who refuses to take responsibility for herself will always be at the mercy of those who do. She may seek out relationships with dominant, controlling partners who make decisions for her, only to later resent them for taking away her agency. She may surround herself with enablers who shield her from reality, reinforcing the illusion that she never has to change. And worst of all, she may reach a point where she believes her immaturity is a permanent condition, something beyond her control, something that defines her rather than something she can outgrow. The truth is that immaturity is not a personality trait. It is a choice to remain in comfort rather than embrace discomfort, a choice to avoid responsibility rather than claim it, a choice to seek validation rather than self-awareness. Women who live as the Puella Eterna often do not realize they are making this choice, but the consequences remain the same. Life does not wait for them to grow up. Time moves forward, relationships evolve, responsibilities accumulate, and the longer they resist this process, the more painful it becomes when reality finally forces them to face it. The Puella Eterna is not doomed to stay trapped in immaturity. She has the potential for growth, for independence, for true psychological depth. But first, she must recognize that no one is coming to save her. There is no perfect partner who will provide endless emotional security. There is no dream job that will miraculously solve all of her problems. There is no external force that will magically push her into adulthood. She must do it herself. The women who break free from the Puella Eterna archetype are the ones who stop waiting. They stop making excuses. They stop seeing themselves as passive participants in their own lives. They start making decisions, not based on fear, not based on what is easy, but based on what will ultimately make them stronger. They embrace responsibility even when it is uncomfortable. They cultivate discipline even when it feels unnatural. They let go of the fantasy that life is supposed to be effortless and instead build something real, Because at the end of the day, the difference between a girl and a woman is not age. It is not experience. It is the willingness to take ownership of oneself, fully and completely, without hesitation or escape. Many women unknowingly sabotage their own potential by avoiding responsibility. The idea that personal accountability is optional, that life circumstances dictate outcomes more than individual choices, is one of the most destructive illusions a person can internalize. Women who struggle with emotional maturity often convince themselves that their failures, setbacks, and struggles are caused by external forces, relationships, society, childhood trauma, or sheer bad luck. While these factors may shape a person's experiences, they do not define them. The refusal to take full ownership of one's life is the root cause of emotional stagnation. At the core of this avoidance is fear. Fear of failure, fear of discomfort, fear of realizing that no one is coming to rescue them. Instead of confronting this fear, many women develop defensive mechanisms that shield them from responsibility. They may blame men for their unhappiness, believing that relationships should fulfill them instead of learning how to cultivate personal fulfillment. They may blame society, insisting that external forces prevent them from achieving success rather than recognizing where their own actions have held them back. They may even blame their past, holding on to childhood wounds as if they are immovable barriers rather than obstacles to overcome. The problem with this mindset is that it ensures nothing ever changes. If responsibility is always placed on something outside of oneself, then there is no reason to change. If every failure is someone else's fault, then self-reflection becomes unnecessary. The more a person externalizes their struggles, the more powerless they become. What starts as an avoidance mechanism eventually turns into a permanent state of emotional stagnation. Women who remain in this cycle often feel increasingly frustrated, yet they do not see how their refusal to take control is what keeps them trapped. There is a stark difference between acknowledging external challenges and using them as an excuse. Yes, many women face real difficulties, unfair societal expectations, personal hardships, or systemic disadvantages. But what separates those who grow from those who remain stagnant is not the absence of struggle. It is the willingness to push through it. Those who refuse to take responsibility for their lives will always find reasons why things are unfair. They will always believe that their circumstances are unique, that their problems are too big to overcome, that something outside of them must change before they can take action. But the truth is this: no one is coming to fix your life for you. No perfect relationship will heal deep-rooted insecurities. No career opportunity will erase a lack of self-discipline. No amount of external validation will replace true self-worth. Everything a person desires, stability, confidence, fulfillment, can only be achieved by taking full responsibility for who they are and who they want to become. This is where many women struggle the most. Taking responsibility means admitting past mistakes. It means confronting uncomfortable truths. It means no longer blaming others for personal shortcomings. It requires shifting from a victim mindset to an ownership mindset. That shift is terrifying for many people because it forces them to recognize that they have always had the power to change their lives, but they chose not to. Women who take full responsibility for their actions, emotions, and choices experience a level of personal freedom that those who externalize their struggles will never know. They do not wait for permission to evolve. They do not expect life to be fair. They do not rely on others to dictate their happiness. Instead, they cultivate self-mastery, resilience, and autonomy. The difference between a woman who grows and a woman who remains stuck is not intelligence, talent, or luck. It is the willingness to take ownership of every aspect of life, even when it is painful. Those who embrace responsibility become unstoppable. Those who avoid it remain trapped in a cycle of frustration and unfulfilled potential. The hard truth is this: maturity is not something that happens to you. It is something you must actively choose. And that choice starts the moment a person stops making excuses and starts taking full responsibility for their own growth. For centuries, women were conditioned to believe that fragility was their greatest asset. In a world where physical strength and political power were often dominated by men, women found security in appearing delicate, agreeable, and dependent. It was not just encouraged. It was necessary for survival. A woman who displayed too much independence or ambition could be seen as a threat, while one who embraced helplessness was more likely to receive protection. This conditioning became so ingrained in society that many women internalized it as part of their identity, not realizing that what once functioned as a survival mechanism has now become a psychological prison. The historical script of female fragility is deeply embedded in culture. Fairy tales depict the passive princess who waits for a prince to rescue her. Romanticized literature portrays women as damsels in distress, validated only through male approval. Even in modern media, femininity is often equated with youthfulness, vulnerability, and emotional dependency. The message is clear. Women who are independent, self-sufficient, or assertive are intimidating, while those who remain soft and submissive are rewarded. But what happens when this outdated strategy no longer works? In the modern world, the old rules no longer apply. Women can no longer rely on fragility to ensure their survival. Society has changed. Women now have access to education, financial independence, and opportunities that previous generations could only dream of. Yet many still struggle with the transition, feeling trapped between two opposing forces. On one hand, they are encouraged to be independent and self-reliant. On the other, they are still subtly taught that their value is tied to how much they are desired, protected, or taken care of by others. This creates an identity crisis, one that leaves many women feeling lost, frustrated, and betrayed by the very society that shaped them. Women who continue to rely on fragility as a life strategy find themselves increasingly disillusioned as they grow older. When they are young, society rewards them for being agreeable, delicate, and emotionally dependent. But as time passes, they begin to see the harsh reality. Youth and beauty fade, and with them, the social privileges that came with passivity. The world does not cater to fragility in the long term. Employers do not promote those who avoid responsibility. Relationships do not last when built on emotional dependence rather than mutual respect. Self-worth that is based on external validation is fragile, because when that validation disappears, there is nothing left. Many women feel betrayed by reality because they were never taught to adapt. They were raised to believe that simply existing in a certain way, being likable, being attractive, being soft, would be enough. When that illusion shatters, they face a painful realization. If they do not take full control of their own lives, no one else will do it for them. This is where the most crucial transformation must take place. Women must recognize that their power does not lie in fragility but in resilience. The modern world does not punish strength. It demands it. Independence, discipline, and self-mastery are not masculine traits. They are human traits. The most successful, fulfilled women are not those who remain emotionally dependent, but those who learn to cultivate self-sufficiency while still embracing their femininity. The truth is, society no longer rewards fragility. It exploits it. Women who remain psychologically immature are the easiest to manipulate. They are more likely to seek validation through consumerism, relying on beauty standards and external approval to feel valuable. They are more likely to stay in unhealthy relationships, believing they need someone to take care of them. They are more likely to struggle financially, expecting that life will somehow provide for them without strategic planning. The only way out is to break free from the outdated conditioning that keeps women stuck in the past. A strong woman is not one who rejects femininity. but one who fully owns herself. A woman who can navigate life with confidence, not because she depends on others, but because she has built herself into someone who can stand alone when necessary. This is not about rejecting relationship softness or emotions. It is about ensuring that these things are a choice, not a necessity for survival. Women who understand this shift no longer feel betrayed by reality. Instead of lamenting that the world does not cater to them, they learn to master it. They see that real power does not come from being desired or protected. It comes from being in control of one's own destiny. And that is a strength that never fades. The path to true maturity is not about rejecting femininity. It is about embracing all aspects of oneself, even the parts that society has conditioned women to suppress. Carl Jung's concept of individuation explains that personal growth requires integrating both light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, rationality and emotion. Yet many women struggle with this process because they have been taught to value only the traits that make them desirable, agreeable, and dependent on external validation. The result is a fragmented self, one that is constantly seeking approval, fearful of independence, and unable to fully step into its power. At the heart of this struggle is the rejection of the shadow self, the part of the psyche that contains unacknowledged desires, suppressed strength, and the capacity for autonomy. Many women unconsciously reject traits like ambition, assertiveness, and resilience because they have been conditioned to see them as unfeminine. Instead, they cling to outdated beliefs that their worth is tied to how much they are wanted, how well they can conform, and how much they can accommodate others. This creates an endless cycle of dependency on relationships, on validation, on an illusion of security that is entirely external. But there comes a moment when the illusion shatters. A woman who has built her identity around external validation eventually realizes that no amount of attention, love, or approval will ever be enough. She begins to feel empty, lost, and resentful, not because the world has failed her, but because she has failed to cultivate a sense of self that is independent of outside forces. This is the turning point. This is where she must decide. Will she continue to play the role she was assigned, or will she take control of her own narrative? To break free, a woman must be willing to face the discomfort of growth. She must acknowledge the parts of herself she has suppressed, the ambition she denied, the independence she feared, the self-sufficiency she avoided. She must stop waiting for the right relationship, for external permission, for a reality that will never exist. Instead, she must take full ownership of her choices, her emotions, and her future. This does not mean abandoning femininity. It means redefining it. A mature woman is not one who rejects softness, but one who chooses it on her own terms. She can be compassionate without being a doormat. She can be nurturing without losing herself. She can be in relationships without making them the center of her identity. Most importantly, she understands that her value is not determined by how well she conforms to outdated expectations, but by how completely she embraces the fullness of her being. Jungian psychology teaches that true transformation happens when a person integrates their shadow self, when they stop denying the parts of themselves they were told to suppress and instead accept them as essential aspects of their identity. For women, this means embracing their power, their ambition, their resilience. It means refusing to let the fear of being too much keep them small. It means recognizing that the only true security in life comes from knowing who you are and being capable of standing on your own. Women who reach this level of self-awareness no longer feel controlled by societal expectations. They do not waste energy trying to be palatable, likable, or acceptable. Instead, they step into true self-ownership, a state of being where they define their own worth, set their own standards, and live by their own rules. This is not arrogance, it is freedom. The world does not need more women who are afraid of their own strength. It does not need more women waiting for approval, suppressing their true selves, or living in fear of being alone. It needs women who have fully integrated themselves, who have embraced their shadow, claimed their independence, and refused to be anything less than whole. The final truth is this: maturity is not about what the world gives you. It is about what you choose to take for yourself. And the most powerful women are the ones who stop waiting and start building their own futures on their own terms.